As an academic, I trained really as a sociologist or sociologist of sport, and I've worked at universities in the UK and in Australia. I spent 8 years at Western Sydney University out there, and my interest really is around sport and society and how they interact with each other, and how society influences sport and vice versa. So for a long time, I've had an interest in sport. Growing up, it was what I was passionate about. My dad always told me that I'd never make a career out of sport, so I've taken some pride in proving that you can make careers in sport, even when you're not so good at playing it, perhaps. One of my recent areas of research is around concussion and traumatic brain injury in sport, focusing probably on two areas, football and rugby. There's been a lot of media stories around this, particularly in recent stories that are focused in football around England players from our heroes of 1966, many of whom have been diagnosed with dementia, and a number who have been dying recently as a result of illnesses acquired through what we think is from heading the football. So in rugby, the problems come through tackling, whether that's head contact or whether it's actually when players are tackled and then fall to the ground. That can cause concussive blows or even subconcussive blows. And my particular area is not necessarily looking at the science behind it, but it's particularly looking at the media portrayal and how that influences perceptions of these injuries. The media in the past would see head injuries in sport as funny. They would report on it in a fairly jovial manner. You'd hear the commentators talking about them being a bit groggy and coming back onto the pitch. Or they would cite it as being this very heroic and hyper-masculine thing to do, that you play through the pain and that the injury was something that they could somehow defeat and overcome. And so we saw these stories that really hyped it up. We've got images of bandaged players being heroised for coming back on the pitch and not letting their side down. And in the last couple of years, as I said, when we've got players who've died and when we've got increased awareness of the impact this has had on old players and young players, we're seeing a shift in this media reporting, that now they're not heroising these players or saying that it's a great thing to do. They're starting to challenge that. And in media reporting, we've seen a shift away from using ex-players who've grown up in an era where that was the case, where it was okay to play through pain or where you ignored head injuries, to now having expert views from doctors and medical professionals who can talk about the actual damage that's being done in sport. So we have seen a shift in the last, I'd say, 2 years, from sort of 2018-19 onwards, that we are now trying to get better media reporting. And some of the work that I'm doing is trying to help influence journalists and reporters on how they can better report on brain injuries and concussions in sport. So not laughing it off, pointing out what the protocol should be, for instance, and trying to really improve what we're doing, because some of the research I've done shows that media reporting really does influence what people think and believe about it. It's difficult in some sports because it can be seen as an attack on the sport, where people are saying that you shouldn't play through injuries or that there's something wrong about the sport. But my view is very much that we must challenge sport. We must try and have a safer environment. At the end of the day, we're quite happy to change sports when a media company or some other aspect of it want a rule change to make it better for the viewing public. So why can't we change sport to make it safer for those who are playing? Some of the work that I'm doing is with the Concussion Legacy Foundation. And part of that is through a media project, which has involved training for student and professional journalists on how they should report on concussion and traumatic brain injuries. So this is not just looking at the current generation of journalists, but the future generations coming through as well. So we've been working to first develop this program and then to evaluate the success of it. We're now looking to bring in a series of guidelines for commentators and ways of assessing this, assessing how well they are reporting on concussion. And then that would help us to provide further training for them on how they can improve their reporting. We're looking to roll this out across a number of professional broadcasters, and we're also working with professional clubs to help their in-house media departments in the way that they report on these as well. So we're hoping to see this impact at the journalist education level, but then also up through the professional broadcasters as well. Sport has the potential to be a wonderful, inclusive environment that brings people together, but that's not always the case. Often it can be an environment where there's discrimination and exclusion and abuse in many forms. And a lot of the research that I've done looks at the reasons for this and looks at discrimination, whether it's racism, sexism, or areas such as homophobia. We examine why this happens. And one of the things that we found is that sports organizations are often based on traditional, historic, and possibly even outdated norms. Sport is often associated with national identity, but it's a national identity that was formed at the start of the last century. And it's very much based on a white, middle, or upper class male view of the world. So that does exclude a lot of people. Now, sports organisations these days are very quick to say that they support equality and any social movement going, and you'll see the campaigns that are out there by various sports organisations. But often what they say and what they do are very different things, and it doesn't marry up. And myself and colleagues have developed the concept of organisational cultural lag to explain why sports organisations are not necessarily the ones that progress cultural movements and social movements. And the reason that we think this happens is because those in charge of sports organisations have often got to these positions of power by over-conforming to the norms of sport and of society generally. So they are the ones who are the typical male, pale, stale males involved in sport. And so they don't necessarily recognise or don't understand some of these other issues. And if they change their sports organisations, their positions are going to be at threat because they've got where they are by overconforming to these norms. So we see this lag where sports organisations may say that they support these cultural movements, but in terms of actually doing things in the areas where they have the power to drive action and to drive change, that we don't see that happening. And so I think that's a really important area to look at to try and understand why sports organisations are not necessarily progressive in this area and how that filters down through the fans. And we see this in social media where there's various forms of abuse that are common practice in sport, and trying to understand why that is taking place. So a lot of my work now is looking at, yes, these forms of abuse and trying to challenge some of these assumptions that we've got and challenge the organisations to actually do something, not just say that they support change. I'm passionate about making sport a safe and inclusive environment for all, where everyone can participate and enjoy it to the best of their abilities. If any of the areas that I've discussed are of interest, and if you want to know as an organisation how you can create a safer or more welcoming, more inclusive environment, I'd be happy to talk to you more. So please feel free to get in touch with me, and we can look at ways that we can help your organisation. We can look for areas where there may be potential difficulties, or just how you can make your organisation even better and even more welcoming and a safer place for all to enjoy sport. So please feel free to get in touch with me, and we can look at what we can do together.